Now, the Pan-South African Language Board will this week be concluding workshops as part of its campaign to mark Deaf Awareness Month. The board says as the country celebrates Heritage Month, it will use the period to celebrate the rich cultural history of the deaf community. Advocate Joyce Maluleka from the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities joins us now to chat more about the work done in promoting sign language. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, we know that this year was a very significant year when it comes to the sign language being officially recognized as a 12th official language. And of course, with that comes a lot of history behind it. Let's perhaps talk a little bit about the history of sign language and the deaf community and the strides that have been made.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and good morning to the listeners out there. I think it is a struggle. It's similar to our struggle for freedom and democracy, because in 1996, when the first constitution was promulgated, Section 6 of the Constitution guaranteed equal status to 11 official languages, but the sign language was not there. So you can imagine, nearly 27 years down the line, that's when the sign language is officially recognized and included in the Constitution. That's a victory for the deaf community. And South Africa is the fourth in Africa to recognize or to officially recognize the sign language and include it in the Constitution. So I think that is very important, because if your language is officially recognized, that means even the services have to be provided in your language that you understand. Section 30, I'm sorry to go back to the Constitution, because that is the Constitution that applies, and that is the Constitution that gave them this right. Section 30 of the Constitution guarantees individual rights of use of the language of their choice. It advocates that everyone has a right to use the language and participate in the cultural life of their choice. But the deaf community didn't have a choice, because when they get to the service point, it was dependent on the person on the other side of the counter, whether they could hear or not. So all those is the history that they come with. Yeah. It is definitely a victory, yes.
Everyone has the right to use the language, and of course there's still a lot of learning to be done here in terms of understanding that there are about 70 million people around the world who use 300 different sign languages. I mean, one would have assumed that there's a generic sign language, but it couldn't be, because even with the many languages that are spoken in South Africa, there are different dialects of the 12 official languages.
Yes, that's what even makes it very difficult. Yeah. Even for them to communicate amongst themselves, and even more worse for us to be able to communicate, because I might be communicating in a different dialect. But this is where PenSouth comes in. PenSouth is doing a very good job in terms of working with the deaf communities to ensure that we are educated, but also to ensure that we have those languages being taught at schools, but also so that we have uniform languages, or the sign languages, so that we're able to communicate properly.
As we celebrated the International Sign Language Day, how are you working as a department with, for instance, the education department in assisting them, and of course, assisting parents who may have children who are deaf, but not allowing them access to schools, because we've heard of the many challenges when it comes to discrimination and, of course, the perceptions that communities may have about deaf people?
We did not start this year with the signing of the bill. We've been working on this from long ago. For example, in 2021, together with the Department of Basic Education, we held a summit on access to education for persons with disabilities, so that we can work with the Department of Basic Education to review the white paper on access to education. We've had the white paper for 10 years, However, there are still challenges in accessing education. Now, as a Department of Women, we are now conducting research to assess and evaluate access to education. There are about 400 and something special schools that are specifically for persons with disabilities in South Africa. I think about 480. And there are about 800 schools. We call them comprehensive schools. Those are schools where other children without disabilities learn, but it also incorporates children with disabilities. So we are assessing all those schools so that we can be able to identify challenges and recommend in terms of what to do. But also we work with private sector so that private sector can upgrade some of the schools, your special schools, so that children with persons with disabilities can be able to learn comfortably.
In your efforts to promote sign language, what are some of the myths that you are trying to demystify?
For example, I think before we even go to myths, I think it's understanding how we exclude the deaf community when we're communicating without a sign language, or even maybe the text. And that is not just us, even SABC itself or any communicator who, when they communicate, they don't have sign language or have the text that are running through. I was invited at one of the schools of the deaf community, and they decided that they're going to teach us a lesson, what we've been doing. They were singing and dancing in sign, and then singing in sign language. All the others who are deaf could understand. They were laughing, singing along. And then they did a theoretical play. They were talking, doing all those things. And we couldn't hear anything. Later they said, this is how you treat us. We don't hear anything of what we are saying.
Sure.
But I think one thing also is that we think people with disabilities are not able in their mind. They are very intelligent, just like us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's perhaps leave it there for now. Some really sound words of wisdom there. Advocate Joyce Maluleka from the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities there, speaking to us about the efforts that are in place to promote sign language.